Ducky, are you going to say hello?
Oh, I was just going to bob my head around for a little bit, but hello.
There we go. There we go. Bobbing your head is not a greeting, I suppose, around these parts.
I have to be nicer to chat. I get it.
Hmm.
I have to respect their presence.
Give me a moment. There we go. Finally, the chat's back up. Okay. Okay, I didn't notice that was a element that I missed. But yeah. Hello, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Whenever it is that you're watching this. Welcome to the Sir. This is an interview podcast where we interview VTubers, big or small, on their experiences before, during, and after being a VTuber, and what got them into VTubing, their attitudes towards VTubing as work, community, and marketplace. This podcast, of course, is structured within the methodologies and ethics of oral history to qualitatively record the life experiences of individuals in such internet culture with chronology and narrative. But we're always open to being everywhere with everything at once, with how chaotic VTubing can be. Isn't that right, Ducky?
Yeah, well, I find that any kind of online content creation medium is pretty chaotic, but VTubing definitely takes it to the next level.
Of course. That's what makes it in depth.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Also, do note we will be asking you, the viewer, to collaborate with us as questions during the water break section of the video and providing us either trivial or in-depth insight into the life of our fun and complex individual of the day. Also, for those VTubers that want to come on, our scheduling is still open. If you wish to share your story, send a message to the email in the description below alongside our interviewees' socials, or find it in the channel's About page, and we'll work out a time and date. The only qualifications as of now are having a model, a following of around 100 on Twitch or YouTube, with liberal exceptions, of course, and or experiences in some level of content creation, whether it be streaming or prepare content. So, all right, that spiel is finally out of the way.
I've never heard someone describe me as like fun and complex as an individual, so I'm gonna just take that street cred and run for the interview.
It's generic. It is generic flattery. Thank you very much. But yeah. Ducky, right?
That is me.
Good, good. How have you been?
Oh, it's not been too bad. Obviously, I've just recently gotten back from holiday, so I've spent 2 weeks in Japan. It was a holiday that quickly turned into a working holiday, so you'll kind of see the fruits of that labor very shortly. But outside of that, it's just having a bundle of fun, getting ready for the holiday period. Except it doesn't cool down in Australia, it heats up in Australia. So I am currently struggling with the grasp of summer right now.
Yeah, you're currently on the brighter side of the Earth axis.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very early sunrises and very late sunsets.
Exactly. How were the flights and hotel?
To Japan, wonderful. The flight, it's like a 10-hour flight from my side of Australia to Japan, to Tokyo. So I just got plenty of sleep on the planes. And then, yeah, I find that most hotels that I've stayed in across kind of like South Korea, Japan, kind of East Asian countries, they're always really nice. They're always way cheaper than what you get in Australia or other states. So I'm very grateful for all of that.
Any highlights that are not in your upcoming articles you'd like to share?
I mean, the biggest highlight was actually going on a holiday for the first time in about 5 years. Like, I haven't properly holidayed like that hasn't involved some sort of family commitment since 2017. So it was very nice to kind of have that little mental reset. That was the bigger highlight. Also, just all the coffee. I'm a massive coffee nut. To anyone that knows me, I would say that I am even a snob. And the coffee over in Japan is elite.
Really?
Yes, it's very good.
I would have expected would be more tea.
Well, they've got that going for it too. Both are absolutely smashing. But yeah, the coffee culture in Japan, not as good as Australia's. I'll always say Australia's is number one, but it's very high up there.
Hmm. Did you get around to that 100 syllable challenge I mentioned weeks prior?
I did not know. It basically just escaped my mind.
Hey, hey, there's always next year.
Hey, there is always next year. The next trip's already in plan, so
Hey, good, awesome. Enjoy that as well.
yep.
Mm. Um, Now, Ducky, how about you? What about you introduce yourself, pronouns, and of course, what drives you?
Okay, wow, that is a complex one to throw at the end there. So, okay, my name is Ducky. My pronouns are they, he. I don't really mind which ones you use. I have been a journalist for 7 years now. I started writing in October 2016, covering sports here in Australia. So covering road cycling, so things like the Tour de France. That's what I did for the first 2 years, and then I transitioned into esports and gaming in 2018. I've written for major publications based here in Australia, so like your kind of newspaper rags, but I've also written for some major online websites, Kotaku, Esports, Deshoto, where I spent the bulk of my career. I am now a freelance journalist. I pretty much only cover VTubing now. I am obviously still into games. I play a lot of League and Apex, and I used to cover those esports scenes as well. But you'll mostly see me writing articles for the Shadow or VTuber News Drop, or producing videos for my own YouTube channel. I have my own interview series called Behind the Model, which is like a short form version of what you'll probably hear today. And I'm very interested to kind of spread a little bit of my own knowledge of what it kind of 7 years in journalism looks like. And I guess what kind of drives me is the thrill of a good story. I have always been a passionate storyteller. I was never good at storytelling until I just practiced and practiced and practiced, and I found that I got a lot of more joy out of telling stories.
Oh dear, oh dear! I just realized something. I didn't unmute you. I mean, at least look, that stop audio on my mixer was picking you up, but it was very suppressed. How
Right.
about we get that from the top, if you
Alrighty.
don't mind? Yeah.
Yeah,
my
no, that's all
apologies.
good. I'll
My
throw it
apologies.
up from
That
the
was
top.
a technical accident I had. No
That is all good.
reason to deal with. um.
That is all good.
All right.
I okay, compose myself. Hello, my name is Ducky. I have been a journalist now for 7 years. I started writing back in October 2016. I originally covered road cycling and sports as kind of my main beat, and I eventually moved on into esports and gaming in 2018, where I have kind of stayed since in kind of that online entertainment periphery. I've written for some major newspapers here in Australia, and I have also written for some major online publications such as Kotaku, Esports, and Deshoto, where I spent the majority of my career. I am now a freelance journalist. I basically only write about VTubers nowadays because, as much as I still love my games and like League of Legends, Apex, Rainbow Six Siege, I'm kind of like the esports side of things. VTubing is a very, very new medium when it comes to kind of this level of storytelling. No one else is really doing the work that I kind of do. And I find that really rewarding to kind of tell those stories that other publications might overlook. So yeah, that's basically my little background there. What kind of drives me then is the art of a good story. I love storytelling. It really I was never one to tell stories about myself, but I love telling the stories of other people, and journalism is a great way to do that. And that basically thrill of not necessarily getting the scoop, but getting because I've never been like a scoop journalist. I've never been like kind of one of those ones, but I do love feature writing, and I love really getting into the nuts and bolts of someone, of who they are, and also asking them what drives them. So that really kind of motivates me to continue doing the work that I do, for Deshoto now, for VTuber News Drop, and also my own personal video series behind the model.
Did you always want to be a journalist?
No. I originally went into journalism as a kind of bridge of a job.
Yeah.
I really wanted to be a lawyer originally. I have a very passionate interest in politics and law. I went to university studying law, but it was kind of in year 12 and first year of uni where I started really developing my love of writing. I was failing high school English at the time, actually, and my English literature teacher suggested that I pick up writing. So like writing about things that I enjoy rather than like the literary analysis of the books that we had to cover and looking at specific framings for that. And so I picked up journalism as kind of a way to just bolster my writing proficiency. And from there, it really just grew into something bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, it went from being, oh, you know, this is fun, to, oh, this is a way that I can earn my living through university, to even being a, wow, this is my way that I can kind of travel and see the world. I got to do a lot of travel when I was a full-time journalist, and that was great. But I never kind of thought I would long-term be a journalist. But at the same time, I've kind of been here for 7 years now, and even though it's not my full-time job anymore, it's still a very major part of my life. So I guess in some ways, I'm still a journalist, but I didn't expect to kind of be here for this long.
You said about you were a journalist for about 7 years?
Yes, so I started writing in October 2016, so I would have just passed my 7-year anniversary this year.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that was mostly in a freelance capacity up until August 2019, when I actually took on a full-time job.
Oh, I see. So for the majority of your time as a journalist, you were a freelancer?
Yeah, it's about 50-50 now. Like it was like 3.5 years
50-50?
full-time,
Okay.
3.5 years freelance. The like kind of it really ramped up in 2019, when I took on a freelance contract that was more like part-time. So I was doing journalism kind of like 20-25 hours a week, and then obviously when you take the full-time job and it becomes your full-time gig, journalism is not a 40-hour a week job. It is something that is much longer than that. You have to really commit to early mornings, late nights, and generally just having your life absorbed by what's happening around you. Even when you're on your downtime, I couldn't even scroll Twitter without thinking about work, because, you know, when you work in games and journalism, when you work in the games industry, but you're also very passionate about games, you play games in your off time, every time you load up Twitter, you're just like, your mind instantly thinks about work. So it's a role where you can't really switch off. But it is a very full-on job, but it is a very rewarding job at the same time.
Are there any methods or any methodologies you apply to your work, or is it simply your proficiency and what's the word, and your writing style that is fueling your articles?
Wow, I've never actually had to really contemplate this before. For me, the kind of methodologies that fuel me is, I have always journalism, there is multiple different types of journalism, right? You can be an investigative reporter. You can be a beat writer on like just one specific beat and become this subject matter expert. You can become like the short kind of copywriter of news. You can be a sub-editor. There's so many different roles in journalism and so many different ways that you can exist in journalism and so many different mediums. Like I picked up writing, but photojournalism, video journalism, radio journalism, they're all legitimate mediums. The kind of methodologies that I kind of use from there is like, well, I have always been a feature writer at heart. I've always liked long form storytelling. And so that kind of methodologies that I use from that are built kind of out of creative writing and narrative building in the same way that you would write a novel. A lot of the same kind of literary techniques are used across both feature writing and general creative writing or general literature, and even nonfiction writing. So that's kind of where my basis is on that behalf. But I guess also more broadly is I've taken a very positive slant on the stories that I've tried to cover over time. I am hypercritical of the news environment and how overtly negative it is. And I also disagree with the sentiment because it is sentiment. It's not necessarily entirely rooted in fact that negative stories generate more buzz and more clicks than positive stories. Because if you're telling positive stories in the right way to the right audience, you can get more clicks than a negative story done in the same way. And it's not just about the per click impact, it's also about the broader reaching impacts of journalism that can't necessarily measure through a social media metric or a website metric. And so I kind of take a very positive stance on the stories I pitch. I take a very positive stance on the stories I write, and I take a very positive stance on the language that I intentionally use in my stories. And that doesn't mean I don't cover difficult topics or I don't criticize people. But it does mean what I look for in a story is I don't look for what's the next big scandal. I look for what's the next big success story. I don't know whether that kind of answers the question, but it is like, I think a little bit of like a methodology.
It answers it quite well, especially with your, especially expanding on the, would genre be the best way to describe it in terms of describing the, oh, no, especially when describing the fields of journalism. Did you start out as a freelance out of necessity and as a means to build up a resume, or was there any full-time positions that were lined up for you after university?
Well, I started freelancing when I was in high school, so I was still in high school when I started freelance journalism. And I made the opportunities for myself. So at the time, I was very deeply involved on Reddit forums related to road cycling, and I had done a little bit of work there in terms of storytelling regarding writers doing well at specific events. And then I kind of thought, well, this is a way that I could kind of catapult my love of this niche of storytelling, plus my dire need to increase my English grades so I don't fail high school. That kind of coalesced in that way. Yeah, it's kind of that's kind of where the basis laid for that launch. But like when I was starting out in journalism, I never once again it kind of leads back to where I never saw myself being a full-time journalist. But a very good opportunity presented itself in 2019 to actually take my passion full-time. You got the opportunity to start up Desherto's Australian office, and obviously Desherto is a massive media brand, reaches tens of millions of readers a month. Probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, gaming website in the world right now. And they were starting their Australian office, and me and one of my close friends were picked up to have the honor of doing that. And so I kind of quit my hospitality job at the time. I moved my freelance contract over. I was freelancing for what is our biggest competitor. And so I obviously had to can that, and I went full time. And, you know, making that jump when I signed the contract when I was 18 and started on the week of my 19th birthday. And I was really, really fresh and green and junior, and I was still studying in university. But it was a great time. And so I kind of just seized the opportunity when I could. And then when I got that opportunity, it's like, okay, where next? So, you know, what kind of topics do we want to build up and explore? And, you know, what kind of games aren't being touched on? You know, where are the niches that we can cover? You know, what interests me? And also, what kind of skill set do I need to better myself as a writer? You know, what do I need to do or were all kind of the considerations during that 2019 period. Because before then, it was just like, I'm doing this for fun, maybe a little bit of pocket money. You know, I got to travel a little bit because of, you know, the money that I earned through freelance. But when it became my full-time job, I could really start, you could change gears from being, oh yeah, this is fun, to like, okay, how can I like professionally develop myself? How can I make myself the best writer possible? Um, so yeah, that all kind of plays into that kind of mentality.
My apologies. Okay, all good.
All good?
All good, all good. Just another technical issue with going back to what you mentioned about how what's the word? Would it instigative be a best descriptor for articles that drive rage in order to gain clicks? Oh, let me rephrase that. You mentioned how you were always looking for a positive story rather than
Yes.
negative.
Yes.
What inspires you to pursue that? Is there a level of ethics that you have? No, is there a code of ethics that you follow in your writing?
I mean, the considerations of whether you do a positive or negative story doesn't necessarily fall on codes of ethics. Like, you know, that falls on a little bit of a personal belief of what the news environment is like. Obviously, outlined in all the codes of ethics that you abide by. You know, when you're in journo school, you're drilled in, you know, the SBJ code of ethics in Australia. You're drilled in the MEAA code of ethics. That's the Media and Entertainment and Arts Alliance, which is kind of the journalism union here in Australia. You're drilled in kind of, you know, that to avoid harmful reporting, to seek the truth, and to tell stories compassionately. And I feel like people will always talk about, like, journalists have to be unbiased, journalists have to do X, Y, Z, but they do forget the fact that there is a human element to journalism as well when you're having to deal with people who are in very vulnerable situations sometimes, where you can't just be this soulless neutral voice that people kind of expect of journalists. And a lot of journalism goes around building rapport, building respect as well for the person that you're talking to. It can be a child, it could be a kid. I've had to interview, you know, minors before for stories, and it can be, you know, an adult. Like, I helped ghostwrite a book of a famed cyclist back home. Like, you know, I helped out with that, and, you know, so the kinds of things that drive the positive news side of things, and why I take that slant, is me more looking at the media landscape and how polarizing and how negativity focused it has become. But also it comes from my own personal joy of, like, I don't tell stories because I don't tell negative stories because I find that negative stories don't bring a hell of a lot of good. And when I got into journalism, I wanted to bring some good. And if the good that I can bring is some happiness in someone's day, or if it's a really interesting story and thought-provoking that they hadn't thought of before, that's going to give me a lot more joy. And I would also be able to do my job a lot better if I put myself in a position where those are the stories I tell. There are more than enough journalists out there to take the negative stories as they want them, but there's not enough journalists to take the kind of positive ones, and kind of the ones with a different perspective on things. Because truthfully, you would know this throughout life, a lot of people don't spend a lot of time at each other's throats. You know, we humans are generally pretty respectful creatures. Even in the social media age, we do like to. There is the mantra of, you know, you want to treat people the way that you want to be treated. And obviously, there's people that go against that. But the kind of storytelling that you sometimes see people fall into in journalism doesn't necessarily reflect that. So I like to think that the work that I do kind of stands out against that.
I like how you mentioned the bias, or at least the lamentation of those outside journalist circles of how of that complain about what's the word bias in the writing.
Mm.
We at least in the history field pretty much have to recognize that everything is biased because you can't really separate bias from being human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the same way that history is a study of older texts. Well, who were writing the older texts? It was the journalists that were writing the
Of
older
course.
text.
And then
So people I think lose a little bit of perspective on that in when they say like, oh, journalism back then was unbiased. No, it wasn't. Journalism has never been unbiased. Journalism has always it's always been the story throughout history that like, the easiest example is war. Is like war is always told through the perspective of the winner. And journalism is no different, where like stories, whether they be for things as serious as war or things as simple and banal as sport, they're always told through the perspective of the winner. And that is an inherent bias. And you can choose to wield that bias in one of two ways. You can either wield that bias and be negative with it. You can use it to attack, to inflict pain and suffering, or against a person or a group of people or a community. Or you can use it for good. And I find that I wouldn't say increasingly. I would find that throughout history, a lot of people have used it for negativity. But I really find joy in reading positive stories myself. And if that's the kind of stuff that I enjoy reading and enjoy consuming, then why wouldn't I want to create it as well?
Before we move on, you mentioned you entered the Kyoto, was it?
Which one? Sorry.
The journalist. No. The video game. What's the word? When you were 19, you.
Oh,
joined.
Deshoto. Yeah.
Yeah. What year was that?
Yeah, 2019 was when I joined Deshoto.
2019. Okay. I'm just deciding whether or not to.
You can do it.
No. I'm just figuring out where to continue from here, or which path. Okay, let's go on to the next. So when did you first? My apologies.
That's all good.
Yeah. So when did you first hear about VTubers?
Around the same time. It would have been, if not 2019, then late 2018 was when I first heard of VTubers. Only very tangentially though. Basically just through my second Twitter account, which I just retweeted art on, like more art kind of cropped up of VTubers at that time. Because that was, during the rise of things like Hololive gamers, and the Hololive generations, and also like the mid stage of Niji Sanji, obviously around like Corona Noir, with Kana and Kuzuha. And I just saw these people pop on my feed. I didn't think much of them because, it just kind of all blended in with the anime art that I had. But then, it also started blending into my music. I would be listening to songs, and I was listening to Virtual to Life by Niji Sanji before I even knew what Niji Sanji was. I just thought it was a really nice song. And I was listening to KMNZ, who are a sadly now broken up VTuber, like kind of hip hop rap duo from Japan. I was listening to them in 2019, but I didn't think of the kind of VTubers as streamers bit until kind of early 2020. I always split up, and you probably do the same thing where you split up, especially people in the English speaking space, of were you into VTubers before Hololive Myth debuted or after Hololive Myth debuted, or like were you cognizant of VTubers before the debut of Hololive Myth? And I was definitely cognizant of VTubers before Hololive Myth, but I only really saw the potential and also the intrigue in covering them after Hololive Myth. So I spent the first kind of year of like my cognizance of VTubers as streamers is in a little bit of denial. I was never fond of the medium, but that was also because I wasn't fond of streamers. But the more that I kind of consumed the content, the more that I kind of saw the clips and all that, I was like, this is a very unique medium. I don't like saying very and unique because unique means one of a kind. But like it is a very expressive medium, and in a way that engaged me more than your regular streamer would. Like you're just your plain old face cam streamer. And I found there was a lot more intrigue and interest and nuance in someone who decides to turn into a virtual character. Whether that virtual character represents themselves, whether it represents an idealistic sense of themselves, or whether it represents something that isn't even human. There's something that's interesting about that, and the choices that lead into that kind of allured me more and more into kind of wanting to talk to these people and wanting to learn more about VTubers. So it was in 2021 when I started writing about VTubers, late 2021, and then I kind of found I put myself in the right place at the right time when I was kind of the first person to do this for a major publication. And because I was the first person to realize that potential, a lot of opportunities kind of fell my way. And so I'm very grateful that the doors did open for me, because in another world they wouldn't have. And with that, I was able to, go out and do my interview series with V Shoujo and move forward. So, it all just started because I saw some very nice art on Twitter, and I was like, oh, this is kind of like what they do. They're anime girls, but they're using motion capture with their face cams to rig an avatar instead. And that was, the technology was neat, but the content didn't appeal to me because streaming's never appealed to me, and it still doesn't. But as time went on, I really saw kind of a different side of the medium that interests me a lot more than the kind of your baseline like social media influencer, and that's why I really fell down the rabbit hole, as they say.
Mm-hmm. It is an extension of human expression.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in the era of I wouldn't say early Web 2.0. I'm sadly too young for that, but kind of like mid Web 2.0 story, like role playing mediums like Second Life or Gaia Online, or even like MMORPGs like MapleStory. I grew up on MapleStory. So the concept of having an avatar to represent yourself is not a foreign thing to me. It's something that is actually integral to my own identity. Is like, the avatar that you see me wiggling around as, I only got the design of 12 months ago, but it is a character that has been consciously in my mind for years and years and years. So that kind of, it was a lot easier for me to make the jump from streaming or general online entertainment to VTubers than say some people who didn't grow up in the same kind of spaces where they interacted with online avatars all the time.
You're the third VTuber or person I've had on here that has roots in MapleStory and Second Life. I just want to say that.
Yeah. I was never
must be a
on Second
correlation.
Life. My stepbrother was. I was never on Second Life myself, but I have studied Second Life as part of like my journalism degree. I did a big study and a lot of research into the online world and and virtual mediums such as Second Life and VR chat more recently, I guess, in the timeline between the two.
Were you in regards to at least VR chat? Did you actually get into the game at least?
No, I have installed VR chat. I've played around in it a little bit. I think it's good. I just think the value in it is with the VR setup more than just the at-home setup. I would much rather be in a VR setup hanging out with people versus being at home on my desktop when I could be playing, at that time it would have been League of Legends. And it be a little bit more That was always more mentally stimulating for me because I'm a very competitive person and I used to compete for my like represent my university playing League of Legends. So that was always the bigger draw for me versus than just hopping onto VR chat and chilling.
You were a uni esports athlete. Huh?
I was, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if we go way back, that was the reason. That wasn't the reason why I got into journalism or games journalism, but it is the reason how I got into games journalism was in 2017 when I started university. I started up my university's esports student society, and from we managed to grow it to more than 1,000 members, and it was one of the biggest societies on campus. We were not a massive campus, so having 1,000 people in a club was a huge achievement. And kind of off the back of that, I was more engaged in the esports space, and from there, someone recognized me because obviously I was tweeting out stuff related to esports, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to come write for our publication?" I was like, "Sure." So that's how I kind of got in. That was how I got into esports journalism. Was that it actually fed through my university's esports society, which I started.
Gotcha. So, what was your first article on VTubers about? If you can remember.
Yes, no, I can remember. I did a series of explainers on what the major three agencies were. So Hololive, Niji-Sanji, and VShojo, and it was an SEO puff piece where we were like, it was from a strictly SEO, how do we get clicks perspective. We want to kind of test the waters on VTuber content. And so the way that we did it is me and the business reporter at the time that we had at Deshoto, Adam Fitch, who was a great friend of mine. He kind of did one, I did a couple, and we wrote about the agencies and like who they are and what kind of VTubing is as kind of an introduction to the Deshoto audience, because we hadn't the only VTuber story that we had touched before then was Project Melody's ban. And I feel like Project Melody's ban was also one of those kind of catalyst points for VTubing in the English speaking space, because all of a sudden people could see that, this person who creates content on sites that are not Twitch, and adult content at that, was getting fame and notoriety. And, that was the story. But then that was only a one-off novelty thing. We realized, though, that VTubers were very popular, and we could see that through all the analytics that we had, whether that be when we did a social media post about a VTuber, it did numbers, or whether it be that you would look on Google Trends and, the trend over the last 12 months had been VTubing. And so we wrote a series of explainers about what each agency was, who their members were, how many subs they had, what is VTubing. And those were the first kind of pieces that I wrote in 21. And then in 22, it turned more into the new stuff. Like, we would write about clips. And then I got my kind of break in April/May of 2022 when I reached out to VShojo and managed to snag interviews with a lot of their talents. The first one I published was with Nyanas. And that was, Nyanas was the first one that I published, and that was May 2022. So 18 months ago now was the first interview that I ever published, and since then I've done more than 100.
More than 100.
Yep.
That's a lot of writing underneath your belt there.
Yeah, well, it was. I did the math when I left my full-time gig at Deshoto. That when I had left my full-time gig at Deshoto, I had written 125 VTuber articles across basically 12 months. And of those, like 125 articles, a lot of them had some sort of interview element involved in them. Some had multiple interviews. The most interviews I've ever done for a piece is 13. So, it all kind of adds up over time, and that only continued this year. And then this year, it's even gone up to the next level with how many VTubers I've spoken to.
At the time, did you see VTubing as work?
Of course, it was my full-time job. And not only that, it was my kind of, neck on the line. I was a managing editor at the time, so I had quite a lot of authority and quite a lot of power to call the shots. And when we started out with VTubing, it was merely an experiment at the show. We were like, okay, we'll test the waters, we'll see how they perform, because if the numbers are good, because sadly news is a numbers game now, we'll keep going with it. But it ended up paying off, and so from there, VTubing was work for me that turned into fun, rather than it being fun for me that turned into work. And I very much like it that way.
Mm. And do you see the medium of VTubing, as in like the streamers, or at least people utilizing these computer generated avatars as?
No, I see it as I see the whole medium as VTubing as like one of the most purest forms of self-expression. Like, you'll get two people, you'll get two perspectives when you ask people about this. One group will say, when people are presented with an online avatar and anonymity, they'll hide their true selves, and then the other group of people will say, when they're presented with an online avatar and anonymity, they'll show their true selves. And I think no matter which way you kind of look at that, you kind of see an expression of a person they wouldn't otherwise put out when they are with their face out there, with their real name out there. And as someone who had my face and real name out there and still does, I'm not some kind of secret person. You can, go find my author page. It's still my real name. It is, you get to see a different side of people when you see them use an avatar. And I think that's really interesting. So I don't see VTubing as kind of a thing where it is like work. And obviously, like, maybe the act of VTubing and like, making content is the work side of it. But using VTubing as a medium is not work in and of itself.
Mm. Where did your interview series came to be? Or when did your interview series came to be? The interview series, of course, on your channel.
Yeah, okay, so Behind the Model. So Behind the Model was an idea that kind of spawned, I would like to say, September or October last year. So in September last year, I started detaching my VTuber identity from my real life identity. I made my VTuber Twitter. I went out and started commissioning my model, which you see now. And I started to stray away from the Andrew side of me, as I like to call it, and embrace a little bit more of like the Ducky side of me. And so that was kind of when that all happened. What was the question again? Sorry.
The question was, well, first, when the interview series came to.
Oh, okay. We were talking about Behind the Model. Yes. Okay. Sorry. I just had to jog my memory a little bit because the expose is a little important. It was around then, and I was like, okay, what can I do now that I'm a VTuber? And so streaming has never really appealed to me too much. I don't mind streaming, but I definitely don't see myself doing it full time. But I really like journalism, and so like I like to think I'm a pretty good storyteller, and I like to think that I can build rapport and do that. And I'd always done written storytelling, but I had always wanted to try video storytelling. I had always wanted to try and put myself in front of the camera a little bit more, and having an avatar was a great way of doing that for me. So in October, I kind of put together a list of 20 names that I really wanted to chat to.
Oh, you.
Pardon? Yeah. So like I had this list of about 20 people that I was like, what, one day I want to interview you on this show specifically, and this is the format of the show. The format of the show, it was always meant to be kind of like a 30 to 40-minute interview series. It was very heavily modeled off a couple of interviews, interview series that I really like. In Australia, we had a television interview series called 1+1, which was kind of like it was just kind of like a 20 to 30-minute sit down with someone who's kind of cool. And that was always a very interesting way of storytelling. And then there's a podcast called Conversations, which is the same thing but 60 minutes long, and it's a podcast and not a video. And when I looked at what content was kind of being done in VTubing in this realm, is you'll have the people who will do like the short 10-minute mini documentaries, or you'll have the people who do the 3-hour podcasts. But there was nothing really for the middle section of like people who have half an hour and they just want to listen to something, right? They're cooking a quick dinner, or they're eating dinner and they just want a 30-minute thing they can plug on in the background, or they want something that they can just consume while they're at work or on their commute into work or something like that, right? And so Behind the Model really served that niche when I really tried to target it to the people who had half an hour here or there to go, and they could go and finish an episode. And so in January this year, I put out a call to action, and I got somewhere in the range of 200 replies that I had to kind of sift through. And from that call to action, I think I've interviewed maybe 15 or so people from it. And to me, Behind the Model is not a show where I look at your follower count, and if it's higher than the next person on the list, I'm going to take you. The Behind the Model to me is about telling stories that I find personally interesting or stimulating. So it's talking to people who do different things in VTubing, and not just people who go onto Twitch for 6 hours a day or 8 hours a day and stream. Because while there's merit in those stories and they do great things, I feel like when I have to tell that story 20 times over, it does get a bit dull and repetitive. And so like, I strive to put out there and, interview riggers, artists, VTuber musicians, LootTubers and adult content creators, people who have done major events, people who have just had really interesting backstories. Like they were, they've got like, they've been VTubing for a couple of years, but before that they did drag, for example, or like, they work in really interesting jobs, like they're a nuclear scientist or something, And all of these things that I'm saying right now are people who I've interviewed on the show. So that was the kind of the how and the why I did it. And then the when was I published my first episode April of this year with Cornelius Lowe, who is a Malaysian pro wrestler as well as a VTuber. And that kind of set the tone for what I wanted with the show. Is I've obviously interviewed a few people who are like, they're just, I don't want to say they're like your run-of-the-mill streamer, but they're definitely like streaming first and foremost. But I've also spent a lot of time trying to find the people in VTubing who aren't just streamers. Like, they do different things. And so that's kind of where Behind the Model spawned out of. And it was always meant to be a way to tell the stories of those people and really kind of lift the veil a little bit. And kind of in a way that is comfortable, where they could chat a bit about the circumstances outside of VTubing that shaped the way that they create content or the way that they live today.
Of course, you're, what's the word? You're humanizing the subject within their content.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think humanization is a very important thing in VTubing because it doesn't happen enough. There is a very big thing in VTubing where content creators are dehumanized or infantilized, because I got pulling out the big words, because they are a virtual avatar. They're treated like a kid, or they're kind of seen as they're objectified. They're seen as an object. They're not seen as a human, because it's an avatar, or like this anime girl or anime dude talking to me. It's not a real person. But Behind the Model, in 99.9% of cases, neurosama withstanding, there is a human behind the model. And so it's important to not forget that, and it's important that in my storytelling and the stories that I pick, that kind of comes first and foremost.
Yeah, people often forget that when you put on a persona online, the persona is not only expressing itself, it's also taking in the audience from the taking in the response from the audience.
Like when people are, when you're an
It's a two-way
online
street.
entertainer, it's not just
Mhm.
when you're a VTuber, it's when you're a streamer. You are a little bit at the whims of your audience. But even beneath all of that, you still set the creative direction, you still set the tone, you can set the community that you want to bring in, the community that you want to engage. And even without all of that, you are not a performative circus monkey to kind of entertain the masses in that way. You are still a human behind all of that. And I think there is sadly a lot of cases where that is forgotten in the online world. And that is especially forgotten in VTubing.
Mm-hmm. So, why did you want to use a VTuber or a live 2D avatar?
It's not deep. If you want a very deep story on this, you don't come to me. I have
I mean,
always wanted to have white hair. Like always throughout my life, I've always wanted to have white hair. And VTubing, I saw as a way to finally have white hair, and that is literally the reason why I got this model commissioned. Because otherwise, I would just like do the content as myself.
mm-hmm.
But because I saw VTubing as a way of like, holy moly, I could actually like get into like some software, get into VTube Studio like I am now. As a white hair anime dude, the thing that I've been dreaming about since I made my first character in Maple Story when I was 8, absolutely, I'm taking that opportunity. So that's kind of like, the big thing of like, why I got into VTubing for myself versus just reporting on VTubing was because, hey, I saw this opportunity to be a white hair anime boy on the internet. Great, awesome. But like, the other thing about it is I think there was I did kind of hit a point in my life where I wouldn't have minded having a virtual avatar and being able to a bit cleanly distance the Andrew side of me from the Ducky side of me, because the two were very, very interwoven. And so being able to present myself as Andrew when I am here sitting in my football jersey right now as I'm being interviewed, versus the Ducky where I am what you are seeing on screen now, and being able to separate that with two different physical appearances was also a very tantalizing prospect.
What team jersey?
I am currently in a Yokohama F Marinos jersey from the J League, because I went and saw a game while I was over in Japan.
I was half expecting some Australian representation, but yeah, that sounds even more intriguing.
Yep.
So you wanted to utilize the VTuber avatar in your Behind the Model series, just as another means of expressing yourself on your channel?
I guess
mean,
so. Like,
actually, go ahead.
like for Behind the Model specifically, I did intentionally wait until as close to when I got my VTuber model as possible to do the show. And that was intentional. Half of that is logistics wise, because it is a lot easier to kind of set a scene and get yourself into a call like this when you have a VTuber model versus like, oh, I could throw up a TV asset and make a webcam like capture, and it kind of plays into it. But I did want the whole, I'm also a virtual model, and I have this virtual avatar. So half of it was logistic. The other half of it was like, it goes back to the whole just wanting that different identity after having had a very public online presence for a very long time, and being able to reclaim a tiny little bit of my privacy, and being able to reclaim a few aspects, not necessarily like regrets with like my work, because even to this day I publish work under my real name, but it's more like there were some personal elements that I was like, you know what, it's not that a virtual avatar patches over them, but because it's the internet and nothing's lost forever, but the virtual avatar was a mental reset in a way.
In a sense, it gives you the opportunity to have a somewhat private life away from your current work.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that was something I really started to embrace in 2021. I got into like a serious relationship at that time, and it was the relationship for me was the one bit of privacy that I had in a life which I lived very publicly, where all of my work was published publicly on a big website, and I had a Twitter presence that I had to uphold. And so, in the same way that a streamer kind of has their life documented, I had my own life documented. I arguably had more of my life documented than like your traditional content creator. And so that relationship was the first thing since I had started in journalism that I was able to take back and keep for myself and have privately. You know, I don't think I ever posted a photo of us together, and that was a really special thing to me. And so when I got into VTubing, it was a way where I could reclaim a little bit of that, where, you know, I am a very open person and I still share a lot of details about my life. But I can also now make the conscious decision to not share certain things if they don't make me comfortable, or not share certain things if it's going to jeopardize my safety. Sadly, being a journalist online, your personal safety does come second. It does not come first. Your work comes first, and your personal safety comes second. And all journalists would also like that. That's something for print journalists, especially investigative journalists. And I have been the target of death threats. I have been the target of harassment campaigns. I thankfully have not received letters in the mail, so they don't have my address. But I'm sure that there would be people who would want to do that. And being able to reclaim a little bit of that and have that little bit of a barrier afforded to me is it is a privilege to have. And it's one that I don't leverage much, obviously, considering that I still publish under my real name. But it's just having that 1 degree of separation. It can actually make a big difference.
Yeah. Hopefully, the worst case scenario would be just like a glitter bomb randomly appearing in your mail.
Yeah, look.
Yeah. I mean, the scan.
I have a good vacuum cleaner. I would not get the glitter off my person, but I think I could get it out of the house.
If it works, it works.
Yeah.
Drawing back to your Beyond the Model series, let's go to at least the first interview. How did you prepare for that?
So I am a notorious underpreparer for interviews, and there is a reason why. And I actually explained this to a good friend of mine who is also a journalist, why I am. Because this friend of mine, they're a reporter, but they haven't really done a lot of interviews. So they came to me for some interview advice because I had obviously done, not exaggerating here, hundreds of interviews across 7 years.
Dear Lord, I'm small fry to you then.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm on my interview notebook number 3 right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I have all my interview notes for in those 3 notebooks. And I underprepare for interviews semi-intentionally. Mostly I will get key points down, but I am a firm believer in the active listening component being the best way that you tell a story. And so instead of having a full page of notes that I would read off and ask every question, I would only have a half page. And then with that extra half page, well, when they're talking, I can make notes. I can be like, oh, they said this really interesting thing. I can relate back to it, you know? So obviously they'll have like a clear structure of like, hey, I went into that interview with Cornelius for kind of like, we did a pre-interview, which was actually one of the first pre-interviews I've ever done I very rarely did pre-interviews, formal pre-interviews, like on a call with someone. While I was a full-time journalist, but for Behind the Model, I implemented it, mostly because it helped me achieve the vision that I wanted to of the show. And it's worked wonders. But I kind of came out of that.
I apologize. And what is a pre-interview?
Okay, so a pre-interview is where you sit down with an interview subject before the call, like before you do the interview, and you kind of get to know them a little bit. You do some icebreakers. You can kind of you lay out the ground rules of like what you're going to be doing. So like, hey, so if you're coming on Behind the Model, for example, it'd be like, hey, so we're doing Behind the Model. The show goes for about 30 to 40 minutes. I budget an hour of time so that, we have, the setup, and then we go live, and then the recording's done, and then you can go. So budget an hour, but the recording will be about 30 to 40 minutes long.
Okay.
You need to be like XYZ. So I'll lay out that kind of foundational bit. But then I'll also ask them some just like baseline questions. And it would be like, that's where I can get the easy questions done. Like how did you get into VTubing? Why did you get into VTubing and all that kind of stuff? And, from there, I can then use the interview portion. This is how I use my pre-interview, as I can use the interview portion as the second half of the question. So what the audience sees is I may repeat some of their questions. So like, why did you get into VTubing is obviously a very easy one, and that can spawn a lot of discussion topics. But I can sometimes skip questions to get into the meat and potatoes and really condense and really make the most of that 30 to 40 minute window that I have. So that's kind of the art of the pre-interview for me and why I do that. But even with the pre-interview, I still very heavily underprepare for interviews because I believe in the active listening component. And while I will jot down in my notebook kind of like 5 at most, usually 3 or 4, but 5 sometimes, kind of key points that I want to hit, key story arcs that I want to hit, I will generate most of the questions that I ask while the person is talking. Mostly because I find that my style of journalism, the way that I do journalism, and it's different from person to person, it works best when it is conversational, and it works best when I use active listening. The best way for me to get that mix is to not come in with 50 questions, but come in with some story beats and then just listen. And then sometimes you'll get thrown a curveball. They will start talking about something that you hadn't planned about, but that might be the story. Like, that might be a way more interesting story than something like you've told that you're planning on telling. And I'm just trying to rack my brain for kind of like an interesting example of that I could lean on.
Take your time with it.
Oh.
Maybe it'll come up if.
No. I've got it.
Okay.
When I interviewed Cinder.
Cinder.
So yeah, Cinder, big indie VTuber.
Cinder,
when I interviewed
yes.
her, yeah. When I interviewed her for Desherto, I kind of didn't know what I was in for that interview. I was like, I know Cinder's big. I know she's done like. The main catalyst for why I wanted to do that interview actually was the reception to her CPR cover. Obviously, CPR, very notorious song in the VTubing space, and Cinder did a metal cover of it, and it went viral for both the right and wrong reasons. And I wanted to talk to her about that, but that was basically the only bit that I went into the interview with. And I was like, okay, what are we going to go to from here? And then from there, we had some amazing topics. We spoke about her ASMR background, her, her parents, and how supportive they are, and the interest, like the stories of like, yeah, my parents watch my streams on the TV in their living room, and like, I could just walk, I could, if I was there, I could walk downstairs and they're there on the telly watching me, and like those kinds of human elements that you just can't prepare for. Like sometimes, like if I was a dedicated fan of Cinder, I would know that, sure. But the thing is a lot of the times when I'm going into interviews, I will know someone and I'll know like their baseline level of work, but I would not be someone who has sat and watched every stream and know all the lore tidbits. And I can do a little bit of prep around that, but most of what I can do is going to be insufficient. So the best way to go about that is to at least have an idea that it exists, and if it comes up, it comes up. But yeah, that's why I kind of underprepare, is because sometimes I find, and most of the time I find, the most interesting stories that you get are the ones that you never really know are coming.
Mm-hmm. And most of all, you're pretty much you're interviewing the interviewee in order to draw their words exclusively.
Exactly.
Or draw their stories into fruition rather than like your own.
Yeah, I would like. Okay, so when I do an interview, I used to be someone who was very adamant at not inserting myself in the story. Mm-hmm. Now I kind of do a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. If I can, the best example of that is the article that I did with Iron Mouse and Connor, CDog VA, earlier this year, which to date is, I think, my most successful interview ever in VTubing. Outside of VTubing, most successful interview to date. Both on a metrics and a personal satisfaction level. I wrote that piece in a very intentional way where the reader could feel like they were a fly on the wall. And so because of that, it involved a little bit of self-insert, like a little bit of, well, this was what I was feeling at the time. You know, this was kind of what the air was like in the room, so to speak. So I have to kind of put my spin on it in that way. You know, so by going into an interview, by going in kind of a little bit expecting the unexpected, you can get an interesting story, and I feel like you can tell a very different story that is less structured. And when things are a little bit less structured and a little bit more chaotic, they tend to be a little bit more interesting and intriguing and a little bit like fun to read, I find. And so I thrive in a little bit of chaos in that way.
What sort of strategies do you utilize in order to, with your questions? Do you start wide and then narrow down your questions? Or do you start with a narrow question and then bring it into a larger topic? In the interviews, at least.
It is a lot easier to start broad and narrow in. Mm-hmm. I find the best way that I do this is I start very broad, you know, and get the overarching story topics down early. And then from like those kind of broader answers, people will usually drop 2 or 3 breadcrumbs. And 2 or 3 breadcrumbs is all you need sometimes to be able to go and be like, yeah, okay, that's an angle that I want to pursue. That's something that I want to talk about. And you don't need a long time with a person to kind of get that. I historically do very long interviews. If you've read some of my feature works, they can be upwards of 4,000 words. The current article that I was actually working on before I came onto stream is already sitting at kind of 2,500. It's about 2/3 done. It'll come in and finish at about 3,200 words, I suspect. And so, you know, just having like the broad base of being like, okay, I can kind of get an understanding of who you are as a person in kind of the first 2 to 3 minutes of you talking. And then from there, I can get an understanding of multiple things. So from as an interviewer, what I am looking for is how talkative are you? And how comfortable are you right now? Because despite the fact that streamers do talk for a living and VTubers talk for a living, some are much more comfortable in interview settings with new people than others. And so I need to get a gauge of that early so that I can tailor the rest of the interview. I'm also hearing for little things about your background. Like, you know, like if you've mentioned like, you know, oh, I did XYZ and then I went into VTubing. Or like, you know, I've done I do VTubing, but I do ABC on the side. Um, as kind of two very easy to read examples, right? But that's what I'm listening for. And then from there, you can kind of branch out the questions. And if you have if you have like a couple of things on paper beforehand, and you don't get anything in those opening 2 or 3 minutes, you can obviously just go down the list and down, down, down. But then half of it, if you get to the very bottom and you still haven't gotten what you've gotten, it comes back down to the human element. And I said it earlier, but I'll just reiterate it. I'm a very conversationalist interviewer. I will just be there to have a conversation, because if I can just have a conversation with you and treat it as less of like a, hey, you're in a job interview right now. Like that's what people think that kind of setting is, and the power dynamic is in journalism interviews is like, you're in a job interview, the journalist is the employer trying to hire you, and you're trying to get that job. And some journalists do set that dynamic. I try to stray very heavily away from that dynamic. I keep it light, I keep it casual, I keep it conversational, and I meet the person where they're at. And so from all of that, you can kind of build out the story from there. And an entire interview could take 15 minutes, 10 minutes even. Did a 7-minute interview the other day. Or an interview can take 2 hours. I think the longest single interview that I have done was 2 hours and 5 minutes. And the most amount of interviews in terms of length that I have put into a piece is 8 hours. 8 hours of audio content into one article. And so you might only drag like a little bit of that 2 hours out of that talk, but sometimes you get what you need, and it's a quick and dirty piece, and you're in and out in 15 minutes, or you really want to do the story well, and you really want to do the story justice, and you've got the resources to do so. So yeah, you can sit and talk for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. So again, going back into your Behind the Model series.
Yeah.
What do you think is the benefits of having a prepared, or at least a recorded interview, compared to what we are doing, a live interview?
I wouldn't say there's pros and cons to both.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest pro that you have over doing it pre-recorded is obviously you have editorial control. People are sometimes more comfortable when it's pre-recorded because they feel like they can speak a little bit more openly, because if they say something that they don't want to say, it can be cut. Whereas if you're saying something on stream, it's a lot harder for that to be cut. But then you lose out, I feel like, in something that is very cool in these kinds of pieces, is you lose like some sort of audience interactivity. You can lose like a little bit of like the community vibe, where it's two people just hanging out and having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
And the audience kind of plays into that banter a little bit as well. You lose that when you do pre-recorded content. The reason why I chose to do Behind the Model pre-recorded versus live is because I wanted control over how long the interviews went. It's obviously not beneficial as a streamer to only go live for 45 minutes. The platforms want you to go live for 2 hours plus, right, to reach your peak discoverability. So when I was only doing something for 45 minutes, doing it on stream was not an option. So that was why I did it pre-recorded. I have toyed with the idea, and I haven't executed on it yet, but I might, with doing the pre-recorded interview, publishing the interview, and then bringing the person on for a stream. And then like we play through the interview and we pause and we talk about like specific bits in further detail, like if something was cut from the interview, or like, yada, 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 it could be like, XYZ happened, why? And kind of dive into the interview making process, but B, also a bit deeper into the stories on that kind of casual stream environment with the back and forth of the audience. That's something I've wanted to explore, but I've just not had the opportunity to yet. Maybe next year I'll finally be able to do that, because I think it would be really fun and interesting. But yeah, those are the. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a benefit to doing pre-recorded content versus doing live content. I would say that it's just serving two different audiences and two different goals.
How much editing do you do as the editor of these recorded interviews?
Not much. I
Not much.
will throw it into Premiere. I will obviously top and tail it, because obviously you record a bit of dead air both sides. And then I'll go through, mix the audio a little bit. Still very desperately need to get better at that.
Yeah.
Chuck in a background track. And I'll also splice in and out some clips. Like, so if we'll bring up something on stream, if we'll bring up something in the episode, I will then split it in an accompanying visual, like a clip of the VTuber doing something, or like a clip of the relevant game or person that we're talking about. Because, well, HoloLive is mentioned. I will bring up a person. I'll bring up a clip of the HoloLive streamer they mentioned, for example. Just to have like a little bit of like break up from just two people staring down the barrel of each other for 40 minutes. And while I recognize the fact that I would hope and hazard a guess that most of the people who listen to who engage with Behind the Model listen to Behind the Model rather than watch Behind the Model. I still want something to be there if people choose to watch Behind the Model. So I don't go too in depth. I will just splice in a few clips and then be done with it. And so an edit of an episode usually takes no more than 2 hours.
Would you say you like to leave the interview almost as is?
Yeah. And that is something that,
of course.
yeah, that is something that I tell everyone when I get into when they get into a Behind the Model interview. Behind the Model is a one-take show. Very rarely will I cut things in and out. Unless there's I have had to, and you'll notice it in episodes where I have. But I would hazard a guess that in about 70 to 80% of my episodes, they are all one take. They are all, we started where we started, we ended when we ended, and in between those 2 points, I did not change a single thing. I didn't cut a single pause. I didn't cut anything. I'll cut things obviously for clips, but like for the full edited episode, I don't take anything out between the time that we start to the time that we finish. In kind of 70 to 80% of the cases. And then in the 20 to 30 where I do, it's usually like if the person flubs up an answer and they really want to go back to the start of the question, we'll be like, okay, cut, go back to the start of the question, restart from there. Or if someone says something that could potentially jeopardize some sort of legal responsibility, whether it be like an NDA or privacy or something, we might have to deal with that and have to cut that out. I haven't had to deal with that yet, but it is a reason why I would. And but for the most time, it's mostly just because something happened or they need to go to the toilet. That's also a very common one. So they'll just get up for 2 minutes. We'll have a toilet break, and then we'll just get back into the questions. That's probably happened in, I would say, maybe 2, maybe 3 episodes. So it happens.
Yeah. Now, I hope we both can agree that a lot of VTubers like to use their persona as a means of privacy or doing whatever they wish to do.
Yep.
Within the realm of privacy.
Yep.
How often do you worry that the information your interviewees are giving you is wrong? A stretched truth, or something that you have to push back again?
This is a very complicated question. So
it's very complicated. I went through a historian boot camp.
Yeah. So the thing for this for me, My model will slightly adjust as I'm going to stand at my desk because my seat is hurting me a little bit. So you can see me slowly rise up and my camera will slowly trickle back down. This is not a VTubing only problem. This is a problem with kind of all of journalism. Like, you have to wonder, is the person telling you the right story? Are they being truthful? And a lot of the times, I am not doing stories that put myself in the situation where someone is lying over a very major problem. Like, they're lying about a traumatic event, or they're lying about not being paid, for example. Very rarely I have done those stories in the past. I reported on a very, very major match fixing scandal here in Australia. Back in from 2019 to 2021, I did a very major match fixing scandal. And then last year I did a very big reporting series on online gambling and crypto casinos. You go into those interviews and you will have someone who reaches out to you and they says, "Hey, I lost X amount of money gambling, and the reason why I got into gambling was because of XQC, Trainwrecks, Rothstein, someone who had streamed to gambling in the past and slot streams." Mm-hmm. And you go into those stories and you have to think, well, did they actually lose the money? And a lot of the time, you do question it. Like, you're like, okay, it's very easy to kind of make up this story because XQC is a big figure and, people don't like gambling. It's a divisive topic. So, what's, saying you lost $3,000 because you saw XQC gamble and then you took on his affiliate code and gambled, yada, yada, yada. That is a very real thing that you have to kind of contend with as a risk as a journalist. But at the same time, there are two ways that you contend with that risk. One is you interview more people. You just talk to more people. And if the story keeps getting corroborated, the more likely it is to be true. The second way that you deal with it is you vet the source. You can do that directly to them. For example, you could just ask them, like, "Hey, do you have proof of that? Like, can you show me, like, receipts or something? Like, can you show me whatever?" Or you ask people that who know them, or you ask other people in the space who you may not know who know them as a vet. And I've had to do that for specific stories in the past. I've had to do it once or twice in VTubing. I was just trying to think back if I have had to do it, and I have. But do I worry about because people are coming to me with virtual avatars that they are more prone to lying to me? No, I don't, because that is a very real risk that we have in journalism already. And the fact that someone is coming and talking to me as a white hair anime dude, as the best example as I can say, is no more of a risk as someone coming up and talking to me because they have a Twitter profile.
I gotcha.
So, yeah. It is a very real issue, and obviously there has been cases in VTubing where people have lied deliberately. I think the most influential case of that I have seen, if we want to touch on an example, is regarding Hogwarts Legacy, and when there was the Twitter account that lied about their trans cousin dying. And obviously that story went viral pretty quickly. I didn't report on it. But you then saw like an outpouring of discourse, both on the whole, one side saying, "Get over it, it's just a game," and other side saying, this is an attack on, it's just another attack on trans rights, etc., yada, yada, yada. And this one death was played up and politicized. It later turned out 2 days later that the death was made up and it was like it was for attention seeking. But that is a very real risk that the community has to navigate. The thing that gets me though is that risk is no less common in other circles that I have done journalism in, it's even common in it's more common in things like politics and political journalism than it is in online entertainment, right? So the fact that a person is a VTuber or they're hiding behind a virtual avatar and they could be lying straight to my face is not as much of a risk as people maybe suspect, because A, I try to mitigate it as much as possible. Half of that is through the stories that I do. But yeah, I try to mitigate it as much as possible. But B, it is a inevitable risk of doing journalism, even if you're doing journalism as a food critic.
I never thought of that. At least the food critic part. Or at least.
Oh, you could go to a restaurant,
Oh,
right?
wait. No. Oh wait, no. I'm thinking of just someone doing reviews of whatever food they made. No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But
so
for the food critic side of things, when I'm talking about food critics, I'm going at people who review restaurants. Is like they could.
Of course, they can be the hammer that kills them.
Yeah, exactly. Or like at the same time, they could deliberately be lying to you about how good something is. They could have some sort of corrupt motive to do that. Whether they have a stake in the business or it's their friends or whatever. That is a risk, no matter where you are in journalism, no matter what you cover. And the fact that it happens in VTubing doesn't surprise me, and it's just a risk you have to navigate.
Mm. Do you think in the future you will ever need to alter your any interview in your Behind the Model series?
Well, I've got into some 30 odd episodes. I think 20. I've got 26-ish published. I've got a couple more on the way where I haven't had to do that yet.
Gotcha.
If I do have to do it, it would probably just be more of an editorial correction down in the description, or I'll do a tweet about it.
Gotcha. And
treat it as a learning experience more than anything. Because even though I've been doing this, I've written thousands of articles, conducted hundreds of interviews, and doing this for 7 years. I'm not perfect. I'm still learning every day.
We are human.
But the way, yeah. But the way that you deal with that is you admit fault, you take accountability, and you make the right correction. That's the ethical way that you deal with that kind of a fault. I haven't had to deal with it yet, and if it did come up, that would be the way that I do it. And I just have to make that clear.
When it comes down to interviewing VTubers with larger fan bases, how much of a line do you think would you say you have to toe? Well, with these internet personalities, like how much does their large fan base change up your interviewing process?
Little to none.
All right.
I would say that. Okay, so obviously there's a very public example if you look up my name in VTubing that this happened. And it's a story that I'm happy to talk about, obviously, with my Silver Veil interview in August last year, where I published the interview. Silver Veil had said some comments in there about, at VShojo, she felt like she had more talent freedom because yada, yada, yada. She can do stuff that other agency talents at HoloLive and Nijisanji can't do. Right? That was the gist of what she had said. I had published it word for word. People didn't like that. We decided together to make an amendment that did not change her words whatsoever. It was still her words. It was just something that was maybe more of a clarification. And clarifications for quotes is a very common thing in journalism. It happens all the time. You'll see it in every single rag. Obviously, people didn't like that. And that was fine. I made the correction that made the most sense, and it didn't come at an ethical cost to me. What she said was still what she said, and what I framed it around was still truthful. So for me, the ethics are clear, and people can make a judge on my moral character or my moral standing or the fact that I must hate HoloLive as a result because of it. Because yeah, people still say that to this day. So because of that, but that was my first real experience in the VTuber community of experiencing that level of hate. It's pretty bad. Not a fun side to be on. I've been on that side now numerous times, so I'm kind of immune to it. At the same time, not. Still digs
Still
a
love
digs a wound any time it happens. But I over 7 years of online journalism, I have faced my fair range of death threats, etc., from fans and from content creators. Surprisingly enough, from there, I kind of, if the fan base or if someone has a legitimate criticism with my reporting, for example, I've just lied, or like I have entirely misrepresented a fact or a quote, 100% I'll make an amendment. That is where I'll make my change. But if it's just an opinion, like if it is like someone saying something as an opinion that you may disagree with and the fans don't like it, I could not give a damn. I really could not. Because at the end of the day, it's what it was said. And at the end of the day, it's also an opinion. And as long as it's not misrepresenting truth or fact, then it's not. Then in my eyes, it's not an issue. And you know, I've had to navigate that a couple of times. Silver Veil is one of them, probably the most prominent. I've had to also deal with it in the Zentreya interview where I accidentally mispublished a couple of names. I had to deal with it in the Hogwarts Legacy editorial that I wrote in February this year. Yes, that happened in February. God, so long ago now. I had to deal with all of that. And, you know, I faced significant social media criticism sometimes because of it. I faced quite a lot in many other cases, and people hold a very large grudge against me. Some people do. Don't know why. But their input as a fandom does not influence me editorially. I will still publish something if it's told to me and I think it makes for like a nice story, and if people are comfortable with it, because with my kind of profile feature interview bits, it is a back and I do like to do it in an iterative process where at the end of the day, the person I'm telling the story of is happy with the story. Like, I want to represent themselves truthfully. And so there is a bit of iterative process that goes into that. Which some journalists don't do. Some journalists are like, you know, I will never share a story with a source. That's totally fine. I am not against that. And to be honest, for the majority of my career, I was like that. But when I started doing more profiles, especially ones on specific people, I put in extra effort to make sure that at least the quotes that I put in the article weren't misrepresented, and they were at least happy with the quotes. And they were like, this is a truthful representation of me. And, you know, sometimes those quotes are scathing. Like, you know, they're being negative about themselves or they're being negative about someone else, you know, but as long as it is a truthful representation. So, you know, some journalists don't like to interact in that way. I do. But that is not because I want to bow down to external pressures. That is because I want to tell the best story possible.
Mm-hmm. Would you have to have any internal pressures that you have to deal with as a journalist?
Thankfully, the ownership group at Desherto is very, very light touch. They do not really, they don't care too much. They're involved in the day-to-day operations, but that's because they were the first writers for this brand. They were the first. They started this website together. They wrote for the website, and now they take a kind of more executive approach, but they still have a very keen interest in the website. But they did not editorially influence me once. Yeah. Not once did I get asked to take down a story because they didn't like it. I got asked to take down stories because they were like, maybe they were factually incorrect, or maybe they information came out down the line that completely disproved it. Mm-hmm. While I was at the Desherto, I published nearly 3,000 articles, and I think across those 3,000 articles, I had to take down 5. Which is not a bad hit rate. And I would say that most of those also came in the first 6 months. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they took down the article for my own safety because I was being attacked for it, and
Gotcha.
it was not worth keeping up. That happened probably twice, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it got taken down because we just got it wrong. Like the facts that we got were just wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that the things that we thought were facts, we got wrong, is what I should probably say in that. And as a result, the story doesn't, there's no way of fixing the story. Like, you know, the only way you fix the story is by admitting fault, taking it down, and being like, yeah, sorry, we messed up.
Mm-hmm.
That happened a couple of times as well. But the editorial oversight of the show definitely didn't, like, I didn't have any internal pressure. Maybe because news is a numbers game, sadly, you might face internal pressure regarding what you cover in terms of like the broader verticals. For example, if one topic or one beat is performing better than another, you'll be incentivized to do more stories on the stronger beat, the one that gets more numbers. But that doesn't necessarily influence what in that beat you cover. That just influences where you look.
What do you have you noticed any issue? But let me rephrase that. First, what are your, insofar that you're comfortable, what are your thoughts on other journalists covering VTubers? Any issues you could think of that would that you've noticed while covering VTubers as a journalist?
Oh God, where do I begin? This is like
Hey, take your time with it.
you this is like you've like, you know, there's like wind up race cars like that you had like as a kid, and you kind of just like you constantly recoil. Yeah, that's basically what you're doing to me right now. So and I'm about to release.
Hopefully, I'm not putting too much stress on your spring.
Yeah, so I think, okay, VTuber journalism is a very interesting topic because in the VTubing world, I am the only person who calls myself a journalist. However, I am not the only person who creates journalistic style content. And so when I talk about VTuber journalism, I'm not just talking about VTuber journalists and the people who call themselves VTuber journalists, aka me, because I'm the only one. I am talking about VTuber reporters. I'm talking about VTuber drama tubers, as some people like to call them as well, or different type of branch of content. But I am talking about any VTuber or any person VTuber adjacent who creates content about VTubing that is news style. So it is reporting on tweets. It is reporting on what people are saying in clips. It is reporting on the space as a whole. You do not get to absolve yourself of the journalistic norms by just saying, I'm not a journalist. You don't get to do that. And I feel like there is a very much a culture online, but especially in VTubing, where journalists or people who create new style content will try to wash their hands of things because they will say at the end of the day, but I'm not a journalist. If you create new style content, you have to hold yourself to the same ethical values that I hold myself to. And I say that because I call myself a journalist. I might not be, people think that journalism online, especially in this community, they come at it with two major critiques. One is that they think that all journalists are like, you know, journalism is corrupt, journalism is dead. They point towards Gamergate as an example, especially in the online space.
That I'm aware of, yeah.
Yeah, right? Yeah, that kind of rhetoric, right? Like that kind of like, you know, oh, you know, fuck Kotaku, fuck Vice kind of rhetoric.
Oh, yeah.
Is very strong in this space, especially.
There's definitely overlap. I am.
Yeah, and then obviously the second one is the people not calling themselves journalists as a result, and that kind of thinking that absolves them from any responsibility, but it doesn't. I am unique in this space. I am still the only person who does what I do. There are people who write for publications. Obviously, I work with Jay and Teddy at VTuber News Drop. I work with Kurt Perry and Jeremy Garn at Desherto who write about VTubers. There are people at Silicon Era who interview VTubers as well. but I am still in that the only person who does it to this intensity for a written publication. You then look at the interviewers like yourself. You look at even people like Domo. Domo's a little bit different, more of like a podcasty kind of beat. Same with like Coefficient.
You don't have to link that to me. I'm not familiar with that actually.
Yeah, so Domo and Coefficient are kind of like two face cam streamers who like fell down the VTuber rabbit hole. They do more podcasty kind of content on like Twitch and YouTube. You know, but when they do like it, they will still do interviews and they'll still have to hold themselves to some sort of journalistic integrity. Not fully compared to the people who consider VTuber like news types, your false IDs, your penumbrals, your Kyos, your Mr. Underhills, and like those kinds of people. Those kind of four and the people who exist around them, Toledo as well, I hold them to a similar standard that I hold myself. And I think there is two pretty big flaws in VTuber news. One is there is a massive anti-corpo bias. So these creators will go out and say that they are very, they used to say they were unbiased. Now they very much hold their words back a little bit in that. They say, well, no content's unbiased. And I'm like, you finally got the point. Congrats. But they might present things, they might present topics that are objectively true. For example, I pull up a tweet. I've currently got one up on my second monitor, for example, that is Mori Calliope has just released a brand of alcohol.
Oh.
Right. There you go. You can go look that up. It's on the Hololive English Twitter. You know, and they'll present that tweet and they'll say, you know, this is what's in it. But then what they forget is the way that they contextualize the tweet, the way that they contextualize the content plays a massive part in how the audience understands it. And 90% of the journalistic integrity comes from how you contextualize that information, how you present it to your audience. And because you can say something like, well, this person said X, but then around this person said X, you'll then say things like, but you know, X person has said Y in the past. And you know, when they said Y, that's directly contradicting the thing they've just said. You know, that then presents someone as untrustworthy. And that kind of contextualization and nuance is entirely lost in the VTuber news space. It is so utterly lost. I would say that most of the creators I've just listed do it selectively. There is the biggest way to look at that, I think, is you look at how Nijisanji has been reported in the last year. And obviously Nijisanji has gone through its fair amount of graduations, it's gone through terminations, it's gone through event cancellations, and it's gone through some pretty like major lows, but it's also had some very major highs. And the way that Nijisanji has been characterized in the VTuber news space is very demonizing of the corporation. The talents have said this has directly impacted them, and yet there has been no change. And while news organizations shouldn't just bow down towards corporations when corporations get sad, they also should not be directly misrepresenting them. And I feel like that line has been crossed. So that's one issue that I take with VTuber news, is it's very anti-corpo. I say it's anti-corpo, I use Nijisanji as the example. One will say it's an anti-Niji bias, but it also happens across all other corporations. You look at like how people were responding to Riro Ron's termination at Idol. You know, it was a 50-50 split. Like that's like just like a recent example. You look at Hololive and you can kind of look back at what's a good example that I could pull out here. Kiara's recent stream. Oh, not one of her recent like kind of like Twitter spaces where she talked about like not being able to do the things that she wants to do for Hololive because she doesn't live in Japan, you know? Yeah. And people will, in those situations, will always side with the talent, then they'll side with the agency. And while that is justified in some cases, it's not justified in all. And there is a very big anti-corpo bias as a result in VTubing news. Mm-hmm. The second kind of issue that I see with VTubing news is it's very superficial. Um, in the same way that I said that I'm the only kind of journalist that covers a broad range of like VTubing stuff for the written sites. I am currently one of very, very few people who actually talks to sources and uses them in pieces regularly. Uses them in my content regularly. My biggest criticism of the VTuber news types is they have abandoned most of them have abandoned all interview content outside of like maybe a podcast. But the podcasts aren't very interviewy. They're more like discussion between like the same panel of guests, which is fine. But I feel like when you abandon the art of the interview, you do lose a lot of storytelling ability. You lose. I find that you just lose the spark, the human element. And that is something that is very easily rectified as well. You can reach out to sources to talk. I do it all the time. And people will clip this and they'll say like, well, you didn't talk to XYZ in this instance. And it's like, no, but also you kind of have to use judgment sometimes, but they have completely abandoned the art of interviewing. And I think that's very sad because all the best stories that I have told in VTubing have been because of interviews. So VTuber news, I have a complicated relationship with. Obviously, the people that I have listed, they have reported on me, for example. A lot of them have reported on me very negatively. Do I hold that against them? I mean, people are allowed their own opinions. I will very much push back on anything that I know is just blatantly untrue. But if people are just like, I don't like Ducky because of XYZ, I kind of just, cool, whatever. You don't like me, that's fine. But I do think that because of the kind of two big flaws that I mentioned, a lot of VTuber news content is deficient. It's lacking in context, it's lacking in integrity. And I think the scene has regressed. VTuber news has gotten worse. And I would like to see it get better.
Are there any gems in the rough, at least in regards to VTuber news that you've noticed actually hits your standard?
I guess news-wise, I mean, Silicon Era, they very popularly do interviews with Hololive talents. Those are always pretty good for like an interviewing standpoint. I think if I was to hand out a journalism award in VTubing today, it would go to Mr. Underhill. I think his reporting has been very solid, especially over the last kind of 6 months or so. And he also takes a very similar vein of reporting to me, where we do obviously report on negativity that happens in the space, but we do try to keep it more positive than negative. And we do, I don't like saying drama, but like, the content that Mr. Underhill covers is relatively less drama than most others. And that's not to say drama reporting is bad, it's just to say that I don't like drama reporting. It has its place, it's not for me. So, like, his videos, I think, are probably, like, the gold standard for videos right now. Obviously, Penumbral does some great streams. Even people like False and Kyo, who I'm typically more critical of, Kyo especially, they've done gems of content in the past. Like, they've had really good videos. False's video on Kyoka, for example, who was a Chinese VTuber outed for a whole bunch of things from sexual assault to domestic violence. He did a very wonderful report on that. I thought that was like one of the better bits of VTuber news I have seen. That was around this time last year, I think. But I find that it's harder to find the gems nowadays. I think you see these kind of creators who once did interviews, they now do less and less interviews, and it's a lot more quick fire content. And I think that kind of I think that is to the detriment of the space.
Mm.
Not saying that I'm not knocking. Those guys have obviously found what they want to do. They've obviously found their niche. I just think we, and myself included, as reporters in this space, can do better by the VTubers that we report on.
All right. You want a water break?
I've just had one. So if you want a water break, I do not blame you.
Hey. Good stuff.
Mm.
You've been through a lot.
Oh, I've done a lot. It's funny verbalizing it in this way, and like you ask like questions. It's like, oh yeah, I have an opinion on this, and then all of a sudden it blows out to 2-3 hours, and you're like, oh god, I've been doing this for a while. I do know quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose this is a great time to if chatters are still out there, for them to question away, give you questions.
Mm.
If yeah, we'll let them be for a duration of at least 5 minutes, and we'll do some.
I might go. Well, I might use this as an opportunity to go quickly refill my water bottle.
Go ahead.
It is
It's
now
a water
empty.
break. It's a water break for a reason. It's a break for a reason.
All right, hold on. I'll be back in a sec.
Oh, my eyes are tired. Oof. I wonder if there's ever there's some sort of blue light contact, or a pair of blue light contacts that I can put on. Oof. Let's see how the fine. See how the stream sounds right now. All right. Sounds fine. There we go.
I've returned.
Hey, welcome back. Hey, it looks like that we're kind of dry on the community questions. So
That's all good. We have talked about a lot, so.
oh, undoubtedly. That's why I wanted you to wet your whistle there.
Mm.
Before we move on, I'd like to ask when these thoughts started developing or progressed, or at least by a year, surrounding VTuber news.
I think there was a drastic shift in how VTuber news conducted itself after False and Kyo received copyright strikes from Niji Sanji. I think that was definitely a watershed moment in VTuber news, because there was a lot happening at that time. The months of February and March this year were one hell of a time. A lot of doxing going around. Yeah. There was Hogwarts Legacy. There was Zion's termination. There was antsiness around Hololive EN. There was so much happening. There was a bit later on in May. There was Silvervale Vebe Nyana's leaving VShojo. So there was a lot happening in the VTubing space. that I think A, led to a bit of a perception of like doom and gloom in VTubing, and B, content creators felt like they were at attack because they had been copyright striked by a corporation. And like, while I do not condone the methods used, I do not believe that. I think it is an abuse of the copyright system on YouTube to take down creators that you disagree with because they used a photo in fair use. However, I do think the reporting in some of the videos that were taken down was untruthful and justified of being taken down. So do with that information what you will, but that incident led to a kind of like a watershed moment in like VTuber news where I saw it became a lot more polarized, became a bit more like us versus them. That's where we saw a lot more of the anti-corpo sentiment that I spoke about earlier kind of come in. And I think since then, VTubing news has been worse off for it. I would say that it is slowly recovering, but I think it was a real setback.
It looks like, oh, I Nithir.
Hi, Nithir.
Nithir, you know Nithir by chance? Or?
I do know Nithir very well.
Ah.
I have interviewed Nithir for an article that I did more than a year ago now, I think. Oh god, it would be close to a year. Let me have a look at this. I can just quickly look this up. It's a year next week. Was when I interviewed when I published the article with Nithir in it. Talking about trans VTubers and how like VTubers can like use the medium as a way to like explore their gender identity safely. And I spoke to them for that, and since then they've also become a very dear friend of mine.
Do you think that they would like to ask you a question?
That's up to them. If you want to ask a question, this is your time. But it is nice to see you in chat.
Well, that's being decided. How about we go through some final questions, I suppose.
Sure.
Thing. So, first and foremost, what is the aim of your channel? Besides interviews, do you want to expand?
Obviously, journalism isn't my full-time job anymore, so what I can do in my free time is pretty limited. I mean, obviously, if I could wake up and have 1,000 subs, it would be great. If I could wake up and have like all that kind of stuff and be able to do the content that I have now and be able to do it on a bigger scale, it would be great. But my kind of aspirations with what I do is less numbers motivated and more like I will stick around and tell stories in the way that I want to tell stories for as long as I find stories to tell. As long as I'm interested in those stories. If I fell out of love with VTubing tomorrow, I would graduate. And I wouldn't like wait. I would just do it immediately.
Gotcha.
But as for like what I want to do with like my YouTube channel, next year I'm kind of rejigging how I do my my workload so I can actually it's more manageable. Because this year I went a bit too hard, and burnt myself out. I guess with like what I do on my writing side of things is I'm just going to keep writing some stories whenever they interest me. And whenever I find someone that I think has a cool story, I'm just going to do the same thing that I've done for the last 7 years. And I'm just going to reach out to them and see if I can tell it. And I don't think that's going to be changing anytime soon. As for like Twitch and stuff and potentially streaming, that's a maybe. I don't like watching streamers, but I can be somewhat entertaining on stream, apparently. But it's again all time dependent, and to me, journalism comes first. I would much rather have a time to write than time to interview.
You'll be the first live news VTuber newscaster, huh?
Those already exist.
Yeah.
So I would not be the first. Those already exist, but I mean, maybe I could. I don't know. I'm not a TV journalist. I got into print journalism for a reason.
Yeah.
So
Um, in terms of questions, and this here's question definitely links to mine. What are you looking forward to in 2024?
um,
It's
God,
the last
okay.
month of the year, after all.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the content that I've got on my plate right now is meant to be published before December 31, so I don't really have a lot that I'm looking forward like it for directly for next year. However, next year I overall aspire to refocus who I interview in VTubing. I fell a little bit flat this year in terms of taking easy ways with interviews, and I really want to get back into the more interesting stuff. I also want to better represent diversity in the VTubing space, and I want to better represent the diverse nature of content creators, both in terms of their personal backgrounds and the content that they create. So I want to rebalance the gender makeup. I want to tell the stories of more male VTubers. I want to look at the stories of VTubers from different racial identities and backgrounds, and different cultural backgrounds. And I want to be able to tell those in a very respectful way. So that's probably like my goal for 2024. My goals through this content space, because this isn't my full-time job anymore, it's not numbers motivated. And when I was earlier on in journalism, it wasn't really numbers motivated. But obviously, having good numbers helps you keep your job, and it would be remiss of me to not say that. However, like in terms of like if there was like any potential interview target, would love to tell more stories about the agency VTubers and kind of bring down the wall a little bit. But that all remains to be seen. I just want to keep telling stories. I just want to be able to put myself in a position where I can keep telling these stories. And if I can do that for next year, and I'm still enjoying it by December next year, then I want to keep doing it for 2025 as well.
Grazie to the diverse backgrounds, aim, by the way. What are the milestones you wish to meet?
I would say that like the milestones that I wish to meet are like potentially interviewing specific VTubers, because number milestones to me are like, well, I could write like more. I could do like 200 interviews when I've done more than 100 now, and it's like, well, when the difference between 1 and 200 in terms of scale might seem like a lot, but in terms of experience is not. So like, be more meaningful if I went from 5 interviews to 100 interviews, for example, right? So I guess like the milestones that I want to hit is I want to. It would be a great goal next year to be able to interview a VTuber from every major agency. Done VShojo. I haven't yet published with Hololab and Nijisanji, but watch this space. And I would also like to branch out into the smaller, like what I like to call the tier 2 organizations, your idols of the world. And I would like to be able to kind of bring down that wall a little bit, and tell their stories in the same way that I tell the stories of indie creators. It's funny because there's a lot of discourse online about like, indie creators not getting as much time in the sun as agency creators, and for the most part, that's true. But for the content that I do, it is not. I've spent a lot more of my time interviewing indie VTubers than I have interviewing agency VTubers, and I think that would be very big mutual benefit for the industry if the wall was kind of brought down a little bit.
What do you want your legacy to be like? Your impact?
I would like to be. I would like to not be remembered. No, yes and no. I would like to not be remembered. I would like my stories to be remembered. I would like someone to be like, 15 years down the line, I'll be like, man, I loved VTubers. I remember one time I read this story about Connor and Iron Mouse and like their relationship. It was so wholesome. They don't remember who wrote it, but they remember the story, and maybe they learned something from that story that sat with them. that to me is what I hope my legacy is.
You want to
I
be
think for me
Stalin
is,
or the messenger.
yeah, I don't want to. I don't want to be necessarily remembered for being the VTuber journalist who managed to interview Iron Mouse and Connor. I want to be remembered for being the VTuber journalist who told their story, and people remember the story rather than the person who told it. So if anyone has kind of taken anything out of a story that I've told, and they can carry that life message on for the next week, month, year, decade, and they remember the story and something from the story just resonated with them and it was a turning point in their life, that's what I want to be remembered for, less than, my own credentials.
There are many white hair anime boys after all.
There is a lot of white hair anime boys after all, yes. And I mean, I do break the kind of VizK dress code because I mean, I've got the bigger coat. It's a little bit like, it's not tech wear. So I have a much more like cozying up in the winter frost look rather than like tech wear on the streets. But yes, no, my silhouette is far from unique or anything outstanding. And that is almost poetic in a way that, like, as a journalist, I kind of just blend into the environment.
Mm. How you doing right now?
I'm going good. Obviously,
good.
like, it's a lot of people in VTubing, a lot of people online just assume what journalists do, and they don't necessarily ask. They think they have a knowledge just because they've read enough news or they've read an article. But as someone who has studied journalism, got a degree in journalism, worked as a journalist for 7 years, I'm still learning things. And the field is very much unknown. People don't really realize what goes into journalism online. People will... This is going to sound really weird, but the people who argue saying media literacy is dead are probably some of the more media illiterate people that I have seen online. So like, anytime that I get the chance to like talk about like what I do as a journalist and why I do what I do, it's always good fun.
All right, everyone. That should conclude our interview. If you desire to check our guest out, links to his socials are down in the description below. Be sure to check his Behind the Model series as well. I would highly recommend it.
Fingers crossed there's a new Fingers crossed there's a new episode out this weekend.
Hey,
so there you go.
Something to be looking forward to.
Yeah. 2 more episodes left for this year, so there you go.
All right. Oh, actually, how many episodes are you planning for next year? Same amount?
26 next year, 1 a fortnight. Maybe 25 if I take a break earlier on in the year. So yeah, call it 25.
Hey, 25 is a good number in my book.
Yeah.
Like 5s.
I'm a 3s dude. I've always liked multiples of 3.
All right. It should be gravy, right, Ducky?
Pardon?
What do you say we are gravy?
We are, yeah.
All right. All right, everybody. Have a good time. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.